The night is quiet, yet never truly silent. Far away, across waters that stretch like endless black glass, you can almost hear the faint slap of waves against a long, carved hull. The sound is distant, softened by the folds of time, but still it lingers at the edges of the imagination. In this quiet room, with a single candle trembling at the wick, you are safe for the moment. Safe, though your heart remembers that the world beyond the walls can shift like a tide. Close your eyes, if you wish, and let yourself step into another life, another time. Imagine yourself seated in the upper hall of a great manor, stone walls cool to the touch, tapestries hanging heavy with the scent of wool and smoke. The air is hushed, though a few embers crackle low in the hearth. Shadows dance gently, stretching across the carved beams above you, and the faint light of that solitary candle wavers as if it too remembers the dangers beyond these walls. You are a woman of standing, wrapped in fine wool and linen, with rings at your fingers that mark not wealth alone but duty, lineage, and the silent weight of expectation. This is where our story begins, not with the clash of swords, nor the triumphs sung by skalds, but in the soft stillness of a chamber where thoughts drift between past and future. Here, in this quiet, you can almost breathe alongside the women who lived through what was left unsaid. Their voices are faint in the chronicles, their stories rarely carved into runes or bound in parchments. Yet they existed, noble women whose lives turned not on their own choices, but on the currents of conquest that swept across their hearths. When we think of Vikings, we picture the roar of battle, the bright gleam of axes under the sun, the sagas of warriors and kings. But history, when told too loudly, can drown out the softer truths. What of the women who stood behind high walls, who kept the feasts ready, who bore children in the hope of legacy? What of those who watched from narrow windows as longships cut across the horizon? Their stories are quieter, but no less real. And it is those quiet stories that matter here tonight. Imagine yourself, then, not as the conqueror, but as the one left in the wake. Your home is more than timber and stone, it is memory, lineage, and the steady rhythm of daily tasks. You walk through halls where your footsteps echo against polished floors. You pass chambers where voices once carried laughter and secrets, where musicians strummed soft notes to chase away the dark. You know every crack in the wood, every scent of herbs hung to dry above the hearth. This world feels enduring, as though it could not possibly vanish. Yet history teaches us how quickly stability can fall away, as easily as a flame bent by wind. The candle before you burns low. Wax pools slowly at its base, a reminder that time does not pause. And with every flicker, you are reminded that others once sat as you do now, waiting, listening, fearing. Beyond the safety of their homes, the world shifted. Raiders came by sea, swift and merciless, and noble households trembled under their force. For men, battle meant death or glory. For women of standing, fate was quieter, but no less cruel. These women were not the nameless thralls carried away in chains, though their suffering was real and profound. They were not the celebrated queens whose decisions bent the course of kingdoms. They were the ones in between, those whose titles marked them as valuable but whose voices rarely reached us. Too important to be ignored, yet too small to be celebrated. Their burden was to endure, to adapt, to become symbols and tools in the hands of others. As you listen, notice the rhythm of your breath and how it slows. Let the image grow in your mind, a candle flickering in a chamber, the weight of silence pressing close, and a woman's heart filled with questions she cannot ask aloud. Will her children live to carry her name? Will her home still stand when dawn breaks? Will her prayers to saints or to gods be heard? She does not know. And neither did the many women whose names are lost, whose faces have faded into shadow, but whose fates were bound to the rise and fall of conquest. This story we tell together tonight is not meant to be loud. It is not the clash of battle or the boasting of warriors. It is the hush of memory, the lull of empathy, and the gentle reminder that even in history's quiet corners, human lives unfolded with dignity and pain. By imagining them, we honor them. By breathing with them in this moment, we give them presence again. So, let us walk slowly through their world. With each step, we will pause, we will reflect, we will allow the silence to speak as much as the words. The night is deep, and the candle burns steadily. You are safe here, but your mind is free to wander across centuries. You are welcome to feel the weight of their stories, but also the gentleness of knowing that they endured, and by enduring, they have something to teach us. I ask you now, as we begin, to let your imagination linger on this thought. What might it have been like to sit in a hall, to carry noble blood, to wear fine clothing, and yet to be powerless when everything you knew could be swept away in a single night? What would you have thought? What prayers would you have whispered, as the sea carried dangers ever closer? As we continue, hold this image with you. The soft flame of a candle, fragile and strong all at once, keeping the darkness at bay for just a little longer. That is where their stories live, in the fragile, the fleeting, the unspoken. And tonight, together, we will follow that flame into the shadows of history. If these stories stir something within you, if you find yourself wondering about those quiet lives overlooked by the louder voices of history, I invite you to share your reflections. Each thought, each comment, each whispered acknowledgement brings these women a little closer to being remembered. And in remembering, we allow them to rest more gently in the night. Morning breaks slowly in the world you know, with pale light filtering through narrow slits in stone walls. The halls are cool, filled with the faint scent of last night's smoke and the sweetness of dried herbs hanging in bundles from beams above. You rise not to idleness, but to duty, for as a noblewoman you are more than a wife, a daughter, or a sister. You are the keeper of a household that stretches far beyond your chamber walls. Your garments, carefully laid out by attendants, are not only clothing but symbols. Layers of linen and wool, embroidered at the cuffs with quiet intricacy, mark your place in society. The weight of a brooch fastened at your shoulder reminds you of the generations of women who wore such adornments before you, each one bound by the same expectations. You carry lineage as much as fabric, and though you may walk softly through the hall, your presence is the quiet anchor of the estate. The manor you oversee is alive even in its stillness. Servants tread across the flagstones to begin their work, maids light fires, and the kitchen fills with the rhythmic chopping of herbs and the hum of voices. Outside, livestock stir in pens, and the sound of hooves against the ground echoes faintly in the morning air. You are mistress of this world, expected to ensure its harmony. Every decision you make is woven into the fabric of daily life. You oversee the preparation of feasts, where roasted meats, dark breads, and honeyed ale will be served from long trestle tables. You keep careful watch over stores of grain and salted fish, for scarcity is a danger that stalks every household, no matter how noble. You manage the weaving rooms, where women labor over looms, the soft beat of the shuttle like a heartbeat through the halls. Their work produces not only clothing but wealth, for fine cloth may be gifted or traded, stitched with the pride of your household's colors. Marriage has bound you here. Perhaps you were once a girl in another hall, a daughter whose future was whispered about in smoky chambers. Alliances are forged through women like you, woven into the politics of men. Now, as wife and mistress, you keep the hearth burning, but you also carry the delicate balance of peace between families, clans, or even kingdoms. Every child you bear is a thread in this fragile weaving of power. At the feasts, you sit at the high table, a figure of grace and poise. The hall is alive with music, the strum of lyres, the low drone of horns, and the laughter of men who boast of hunts and battles. Mead passes from hand to hand, spilling golden on the floor as cups are raised in cheer. You smile, you nod, you speak softly when needed, and your silence is just as carefully measured. You are both ornament and authority, admired for beauty, but also respected for the dignity of your household's name. Beyond the feasts lie the quieter duties. In private chambers, you teach children, your own and those fostered from other noble families. You teach them songs that carry the weight of memory, prayers whispered before bed, the stories of ancestors that anchor them to their place in the world. You know that every word you pass on may outlast you, shaping the way they will remember their people when you are gone. Your chambers themselves are sanctuaries. Carpets soften the stone floor, a chest holds treasures of embroidered cloth and jewelry, and a small altar rests in the corner where you kneel to pray. Candles burn gently here, their glow casting warmth against cold walls. It is in this space that you allow yourself moments of quiet, Time to breathe, to sow, to think. Yet even here, the weight of expectation is never absent. There is fragility beneath this ordered life. You are respected, but you are not free. Your path was chosen long before you took your first steps across these floors. Your marriage was arranged to bind two families. Your children will be promised away in the same manner. Your worth is measured in lineage, in alliances, in the ability to uphold your family's name. You know that if fortune changes, if crops fail, if a lord loses power, if war comes to your gates, you are as vulnerable as the smallest servant in your household. And though the hall may feel secure, with thick walls and loyal guards, there are whispers you cannot ignore. Traders bring tales of longships, sleek and swift, cutting across the seas. They speak of fire and plunder, of churches stripped of gold, of towns left smoldering. Some dismiss these stories as distant troubles, claiming no raider would dare strike at noble households. But you know better. The wealth of your estate, the very finery that surrounds you, would only tempt those who come hungry for silver and slaves. Still, you press the thought aside. You carry on with dignity, as your duty demands. You tend to guests, oversee your household, and walk the gardens where herbs grow fragrant in the morning sun. You sit by the hearth with embroidery in your hands, the needle rising and falling as your mind drifts. And always, the rhythm of life continues. Meals prepared, prayers spoken, halls echoing with the voices of kin. There is peace here, yes, but it is a peace that feels delicate, like frost that could melt at the first strong sun. You know it in your heart, even if no one speaks it aloud. Life for women like you is built on stability that is never guaranteed. Perhaps tomorrow will be like today, with laughter and music in the hall. Perhaps tomorrow will bring something else entirely. Can you picture this stillness before the storm? The way each day seems to mirror the last, giving the illusion of permanence? These women believed tomorrow would look the same as today, because to imagine otherwise was too heavy a burden. And yet, history teaches us that tomorrow did change. For some, it came with smoke rising on the horizon, with shouts breaking the calm, with the crash of wooden doors splintering beneath iron. But tonight, in this moment, we pause here, in the fragile calm of a noblewoman's life before the storm. Listen closely, and you can almost hear her footsteps across the hall, her quiet voice instructing servants, the rustle of her gown as she bends to comfort a child. This is her world, both fragile and dignified. A world that feels unshakable, yet rests on ground far less firm than it appears. So I ask you, as you imagine her life, can you feel the tension of that stillness? Can you sense the weight of believing each day will remain unchanged, even as fate approaches unseen? If you have ever stood at such a moment, when life felt steady, only to shift without warning, then you know something of what these women must have felt. Let me know in the comments if you have known that stillness before a storm, and together we will carry their memory into the quiet of this night. The night that begins in quiet rarely ends in the same way. You are in the hall, the fire low, its embers glowing softly like eyes half shut in slumber. Children breathe steadily on their straw beds, attendants murmur in whispers, and the air carries that fragile sense of safety you have longed to believe in. And then it comes. First, a sound. A distant thud, not the rhythm of hooves you know, nor the clatter of carts on stone. Something sharper, something alien. You sit upright, straining to hear. The silence that follows is worse than the sound itself, for silence can trick the mind. But then the shouts come, harsh voices, foreign to your ear, broken by laughter that chills your blood. A horn blows, long and low, and the spell of safety shatters like glass struck by stone. The hall erupts into motion. Servants cry out, children scream, men stumble toward weapons that had seemed unnecessary only hours before. You feel the surge of fear rush through the chamber, like a wind that cannot be stopped. And then the pounding begins, the heavy crash of axes against wood, the splintering of doors that were meant to hold. Smoke creeps in before the flames, carrying the sharp tang of pitch. The world you knew only heartbeats before is unmade in moments. Shouts echo off the stone, steel strikes against shields, and the scent of blood mingles with the smoke. You cling to what you can, perhaps the hand of a child, perhaps the carved edge of a table, but everything is chaos. Your heart races, pounding in your chest so loudly you can hardly hear anything else, though the noise around you is deafening. Flames leap upward, licking the tapestries you once admired in the daylight. They curl and blacken, falling in ash around you. The hall, once a place of feasts and songs, becomes a trap of smoke and terror. You think of the laughter that filled this chamber not long ago, of music played softly beneath candlelight. And now you hear only the clash of steel and the cries of the wounded. Memory and present blur together, and you wish, even for a moment, to go back to that stillness before the storm. Men fight, but the raiders are swift, practiced, relentless. You hear the crunch of boots against stone as they surge into the hall, their eyes catching the firelight, their armor gleaming with sweat and blood. Some you recognize as kin fall quickly, their shields broken, their voices cut short. The sacredness of home, the place where you bore children, where prayers were whispered, crumbles under their advance. For you, and for women like you, death is not the fate they choose. A raider's hand grips your arm, rough and unyielding, pulling you from the hall you once ruled. You cry out, but your voice is swallowed by the chaos. You see faces you know, friends, kin, some cut down, others dragged away alongside you. The line between noble and servant blurs now, all are captives when the hall is taken. The disorientation is total. Smoke blinds you, tears sting your eyes, and your legs stumble over fallen beams and bodies alike. The air burns your throat, and yet you are forced forward, out into the night where the longships wait. You glimpse the sky, dark and endless, stars glimmering indifferently above the ruin. You remember standing in this courtyard once, when it was filled with music, with voices lifted in celebration. Now it is filled with shouts and fire, the sacred place made profane. You may be spared the axe, for your garments, your bearing, your very presence mark you as valuable. But the mercy is bitter. To be spared is not to be saved, it is to be taken. You are not a corpse on the floor, but neither are you free. You are cargo now, part of the plunder as surely as the silver chalices and gilded reliquaries seized from your hall. The children cry out, reaching for mothers who are torn from them. The elderly stumble, unable to keep pace. Some are left behind, their fates sealed by fire. The raiders herd you toward the shore, their laughter cutting through the night. To them, this is victory. To you, it is the unmaking of everything you have ever known. You pause, in some hidden place within yourself, and recall the stillness before the storm, the meals carefully prepared, the hymns sung in the chamber, the faint hum of looms in the weaving room. All of it seems distant now, like a dream fading as you wake into nightmare. The crash of steel is loud, yes, but it is the quiet memory that wounds more deeply. To know what was, and to feel it torn from you, is a pain sharper than the sword. As you stumble forward under the firm grip of your captors, you notice small details even in your terror. The firelight flickers across the carved beams of the hall you will never see whole again. The familiar scent of oak and wool is drowned in the acrid stench of smoke. The night air, once crisp and cool, is heavy with ash. These details burn themselves into memory, for you know you may never return. You wonder, though you cannot ask, is it worse to lose your home entirely, to watch it burn to the ground, or to be carried far from it, knowing it still stands in ruin behind you? Is it more haunting to have nothing left at all, or to have your life stretched out endlessly in a place that is not yours, under laws and customs you do not understand? The question lingers, like the smoke that clings to your skin. The raiders push you toward their ships, the long, slender vessels that brought terror to your shore. You hear the creak of timbers, the slap of water against the hull. You are forced aboard, the boards cold and wet beneath your feet. The smell of tar and salt surrounds you, mingling with sweat and iron. The oars stand ready, and the sea waits, vast and merciless. Behind you, the hull collapses inward, the flames devouring the last of its beams. It is gone, utterly, save for the memories you carry. You think of the sacred rituals that once blessed those walls, of the prayers spoken there, of the lives lived and ended beneath its roof. All of it reduced to embers, all of it drifting upward into the indifferent night sky. And so you are taken. Not slain, but carried away. Not forgotten, but transformed into something you never wished to be. A prize, a token, a piece of the wealth torn from your people. In this moment, the stillness of memory collides with the violence of reality, and you are left between them, no longer mistress of a hall, not yet a captive in another. Only a woman suspended in fear, in grief, in the hollow of the unknown. As you listen, I ask, what do you think is more haunting, the loss of home or being carried far from it? Share your thoughts, for each reflection is a way of bringing these voices, so often left in silence, back into the gentle light of remembrance. Imagine now that the fire has dimmed, that the cries of the raid have settled into memory, and you find yourself not in your familiar hall but in a place that is not home. You are alive, yes, but not free. You were spared when others were not, and that sparing has its own weight. For you are not only yourself, you carry the burden of your lineage, your family's name, the alliances written into your marriage, and the invisible chains of honor. And now, in the eyes of your captors, you are something else entirely. A piece of value, a bargaining tool, a body woven into the threads of politics and power. This was often the unspoken fate of noble women after Viking conquests. Death passed over them not out of mercy but out of calculation. To be killed would be an end, to be captured meant usefulness. A woman of standing was rarely discarded. She might be ransomed back to her kin for silver, or wed against her will into the household of her captor, binding two rival families with cords as strong as steel. Her silence was assumed, her compliance expected. Pause here with me, and imagine the weight of such expectation. To stand still while your world crumbled, and to accept that you lived not for yourself but for what you were worth to others. Imagine being seen not as yourself, but as what your family name was worth. How would that feel? If you're with me so far, consider subscribing to hear more untold histories. The records we have, faint though they are, whisper of this reality. Chronicles written by monks, sagas sung in smoky halls, even letters exchanged across kingdoms, they hint at these women but seldom give them voice. A noblewoman might appear in the margins of a saga, not as a person but as a prize. She is called the wife of so-and-so, the daughter of the king, the sister of the lord. She is spoken of in terms of possession. Her value is weighed not in her laughter or her grief, not in her dreams or her prayers, but in the silver she might fetch or the alliances she might seal. Think of the famous story of Melkorka, an Irish princess mentioned in the Icelandic Laxdæla saga. She was captured and sold as a slave, her noble birth concealed, until at last her origins were revealed through fragments of her speech. Even her voice, her very language, was the clue that gave her value again. And yet, we hear so little of her own feelings, her own sorrows. History remembered her station, not her soul. For noblewomen in the wake of conquest, silence was not just expected, it was enforced by necessity. To speak too boldly might anger captors, might diminish the chance of survival. Better to fold into the quiet, to endure, to bide time. There is a kind of resilience in silence, though. A quiet strength in choosing to remain alive, even when the terms of life are cruelly dictated by others. I invite you to imagine such a life. You, sitting in a strange hall, the timbers foreign, the rushes on the floor carrying scents not of your homeland but of somewhere else. The language around you harsh, unfamiliar, maybe only half understood. You are dressed not in the garments you once knew, but in what has been given to you. And still, you hold within you the memory of your own home, the cadence of prayers whispered in your tongue, the feel of your own family's embrace. The world sees you as a symbol, but inside you remain a whole person, even if no one asks what you feel. How different this fate was from that of the common women. For them, capture might mean being taken as thralls, enslaved, forced into labor or worse. Their lives were also consumed by conquest, though in different ways. They, too, bore trauma and loss, yet their names are even less likely to appear in record. The noblewoman at least is noted for her value, for the ransom or the alliance she represents. The common woman, faceless in the annals, becomes part of the mass of the unremembered. Both fates are tragic, but one is witnessed, if only faintly, while the other is nearly erased. What strikes me most, as I think of these women, is the way history allows us only fragments. A mention in a law code, perhaps, that details how much silver should be paid for her return. A passing note in a saga. She was given in marriage to cement the peace. A monk's record of tribute sent from one kingdom to another, listing women among the treasures. No one writes of their tears, of their fear, of the nights they lay awake remembering the familiar sound of waves against their own shore. Sometimes I wonder, did they whisper stories to themselves, in their own minds, to stay connected to who they were? Did they recite prayers, or lullabies, or snatches of poetry, carrying the rhythm of home across the silence of captivity? We will never know for certain, but it is human to cling to memory, to carry identity in small, private rituals. When ransoms were arranged, these women became the subject of negotiation, their fates discussed across tables heavy with food and drink. This much silver, one might say. Or her return in exchange for land. To imagine one's very life as the currency of peace is a strange and haunting thought. Yet this was reality for many. The woman herself rarely had any say. She was the bridge between men's bargains, her body and name the seal upon the pact. And when ransom was not secured, marriage was the alternative. Some noblewomen became wives in households not of their choosing, their foreignness turned into a kind of ornament or proof of victory. A marriage was not always cruel, sometimes it softened into companionship, into shared children, into a life lived within new rhythms. But it was never freely chosen. That lack of choice left a wound, even if time layered over it. I often return to the question of agency. Did any of these women find ways, however small, to assert themselves? Perhaps in the running of a household, in the teaching of children, in the quiet guidance offered to a husband or a court. Influence often hides in the corners, and women throughout history have learned to use what power they could grasp. Yet the truth remains, their stories were shaped by forces they did not control, their lives bargained away like coin. Sit with that for a moment. To be spoken of, not spoken with. To be bartered, not asked. It makes one pause, and perhaps it reminds us that while history records kings and warriors, the truer history, the human history, often rests in the silences. Even today, when we read the sagas or the annals, we must learn to listen for what is not said. The spaces where women's voices should be, but are not. The pauses between lines where grief might have been. The absence is itself a kind of testimony. It tells us that these women were there, that their lives mattered, even if the chroniclers did not care to write their words. I invite you to hold these women in your imagination, even as history did not. See them not as bargaining pieces, but as human beings who once breathed, who once felt the warmth of firelight, who once hoped for tomorrow. Their worth was measured by others in silver and alliances, but we can choose to remember them in a different way, as people whose unspoken fates still echo across the centuries. And so, this chapter closes in reflection. Not in resolution, for there is little to resolve, but in remembrance. As you rest tonight, perhaps think of the women who endured not death but silence, who carried the heavy title of captive of honor. Their stories are seldom told, but if you listen closely, in the gaps of the sagas, in the forgotten names, you may just hear them. The journey from capture to arrival is long, though in truth, you remember little of it. The sea carried you away, the waves whispering in a language that matched the harsh syllables of your captors. Days blurred into nights, and nights into days, until at last the world you knew was gone behind you, hidden beyond the horizon. You step onto new soil not as a guest, but as something both less and more, less in freedom, more in symbolic value. You are now part of a life you did not choose. Everything here feels different. The very air carries a strange scent, salt mixed with pine, smoke mixed with unfamiliar herbs. The land is both wild and ordered, forests pressing close yet dotted with farms and halls where the timber walls rise dark against the sky. The language strikes your ears with sharp consonants and rhythms that are hard to follow. When people speak, you feel adrift, catching only fragments. And yet, with time, your ears grow more accustomed. You learn enough to understand commands, greetings, perhaps even a jest or two. Slowly, you begin to answer back, your tongue wrapping itself awkwardly around foreign words. Feasts are another world entirely. At home, the rituals were ordered, the courses deliberate, the conversation restrained. Here, the hall roars with sound, laughter, boasting, songs carried by deep voices. The air is thick with smoke and the smell of roasted meat. Horns of ale are passed freely, and the boundaries between noble and common seem less rigid. You sit among strangers, a cup placed in your hand, a plate before you laden with foods both familiar and strange. Perhaps there are eels or smoked fish, heavy with salt. Perhaps flatbread, coarse but filling, or cheeses sharp and tangy. To eat is to join, at least for a moment, though your silence still marks you as other. Clothing, too, speaks its own language. Gone are the gowns and embroidered sleeves you once wore, heavy with the colors and patterns of your homeland. In their place are garments cut in different ways, wool dresses clasped with brooches at the shoulders, strings of beads and amber adorning the chest. To your eyes, they feel foreign at first, perhaps even unflattering. Yet slowly, you notice their practicality. The wool is warm against the northern chill, the brooches sturdy, the beads bright in the firelight. And you learn that these, too, are markers of rank, of place within a society that is not yours yet claims you nonetheless. Religion surrounds you in quiet and in spectacle. If you were raised in the Christian faith, the absence of church bells weighs heavy. There are no familiar prayers murmured at dawn, no priest to raise the cross and bless the bread. Instead, you hear invocations to Odin, to Freya, to Thor, spoken by men and women alike. Sacrifices are made, perhaps a goat, perhaps something greater, blood spilt to honor unseen gods. Fires blaze, and chants rise, and though your lips stay still, your heart aches for the hymns of your youth. In secret, perhaps you whisper your own prayers when no one listens, clutching at the faith of your birth even as the new world presses in. And yet, amid all this strangeness, you find yourself surviving. At first, survival means little more than breathing, rising each morning, doing what is asked of you. If you are made a wife, you learn the rhythms of the household, tending to servants, overseeing food stores, weaving and sewing for the hall. If you are made a concubine, your position is more fragile, yet still you adapt, navigating carefully the moods of the household and the demands of those who own you. If you are given as a bond between families, your duty is to bear children, to shape your existence into theirs. It is here, in the quiet tasks of daily life, that resilience blooms. You teach yourself to endure, to bend without breaking. Perhaps you hum songs from your homeland while spinning wool, the melodies disguised as idle murmurs. Perhaps you trace a cross upon the dough before baking bread, a gesture so small it might go unnoticed. Perhaps you speak to your children in your old tongue when you are alone, planting seeds of memory that may outlast you. Each act is a thread tying you back to where you came from, a way of carrying your traditions quietly within yourself. What would you hold on to most, your language, your faith, or the memory of your homeland? Tell me below. The landscapes themselves demand your attention. Where once rolling fields or gentle rivers surrounded you, now fjords cut into the land, steep and sharp, their waters deep and dark. Mountains rise higher than you have ever seen, capped with snow that lingers even into spring. The winters are long, biting, with darkness that seems endless. But then comes summer, with days that stretch wide, the sun barely setting, the air alive with the buzzing of bees and the shimmer of water. This land, though foreign, has its own beauty, one that creeps into your senses even as your heart longs for home. Children, if they come, become both anchor and reminder. They are half yours and half of this new land, carrying in their faces the features of both lineages. To hold them is to feel both comfort and ache. They bind you to your captors, yet they also carry your own blood forward. In them, you might whisper the stories of your past, or you might stay silent, fearing to draw attention. But always, they are proof of your endurance, living testaments to your survival in a place that once seemed unbearable. There is a strange power, too, in managing a household. Even as a stranger, you might come to oversee the weaving, the brewing, the storage of goods, the care of servants. These tasks, humble though they seem, keep the hall alive. Without your work, fires would go cold, bellies would go empty, cloth would go unwoven. Perhaps in time, others come to respect your steadiness, your skill. Influence is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet shaping of daily life, the gentle persistence of order amid chaos. Still, the longing never leaves entirely. On certain nights, when the hall grows quiet and the fire burns low, you feel the ache of absence. You remember the voices of your family, the sense of your homeland, the way the stars looked above familiar fields. You wonder if they think of you, if your name is ever spoken back home. Perhaps they prayed for your ransom, perhaps they mourned you as dead. You are alive, but in another world, and that is its own kind of ghostliness. I often think of the inner worlds these women must have built to survive. Not all resilience is outward. Some is hidden, secret, known only to the heart. It might be the quiet act of writing a name in the dirt, a name from home, quickly erased. It might be the habit of collecting small objects, a stone, a feather, a piece of thread, that remind one of the past. It might be the daily choice to breathe, to rise, to continue, even when the soul feels heavy. These small acts of endurance are no less heroic than the feats sung in sagas. And so, life after capture is not only survival but transformation. You do not remain who you were, for that self belongs to the past. Instead, you become someone new, someone shaped by both loss and adaptation. A stranger in a new land, yes, but also a woman who learns to live between worlds, the world you left and the world you now inhabit. If the sagas seldom tell us these stories, it is because they dwell on men's victories, men's boasts, men's battles. But we, here together, can imagine the quieter tales, the ones carried in silence. We can honor the women who endured, who bent but did not break. Faith is more than ritual. It is the rhythm of the day, the words whispered before sleep, the gestures made almost without thought. 4 noble women carried into new lands, faith became both a lifeline and a burden. Many came from regions already touched by Christianity, lands where bells called the faithful, where prayers rose in Latin, where the cross was already a familiar sight. When they found themselves in pagan households, among families who offered to gods older than their own, they stood between worlds. A woman might have crossed the sea clutching a small cross, hidden beneath her garments. To her, it was more than wood or metal. It was memory, protection, identity. But in the hall she entered, the people raised horns to Odin, left offerings to Freyr, called on Thor's strength. She could not speak against them, not openly. Silence became her ally. And so, prayers were whispered in the quiet of night, words carried only to herself and her God. This in-between life was not only about secrecy, it was about survival. A woman in such a place could not choose freely which faith to display. To reject the rituals of her new household would mark her as outsider, perhaps even dangerous. To reject her own faith entirely would be to lose the last tie to home. Many lived with both, standing in the smoke of pagan offerings by day, while repeating the Lord's Prayer softly by night. Have you ever felt caught between 2 worlds, old and new? If this resonates, leave me a thought. The tension between Christianity and paganism was not always hostile. In some households, noble women were allowed to keep their faith openly, especially when their lineage or ransom value commanded respect. Some even introduced Christianity to their new families, becoming quiet bridges between belief systems. A story repeated in chronicles tells of queens and noblewomen who persuaded their husbands, chieftains, or sons to accept baptism. Sometimes their influence was gentle, guiding through example, softening hearts with their own devotion. Other times it was strategic. Christianity offered alliances, new trade, and legitimacy with powerful neighbors. Yet even where faith led to conversion, it was not simple. Imagine a hall that had, for generations, raised toasts to Thor and Freyr. Now the woman of the house lights a candle before a cross. Her children grow up hearing both the sagas of gods and the psalms of saints. The household lives in 2 worlds at once, never fully leaving one behind, never fully surrendering to the other. For the women at the heart of this shift, the inner conflict must have been profound. Faith is tied to memory, to the places where one first prayed, to the voices of loved ones who prayed alongside you. To keep faith alive in a foreign land was to keep alive a part of the self that no capture, no marriage, no conquest could erase. But it also meant carrying dissonance, the constant reminder that the world around you bowed to different gods. Some women found ways to reconcile the two. Rituals were blended, layered quietly together. A Christian prayer might be said before a journey, but so too might a small offering to the household spirits, to keep peace with one's new kin. A woman might celebrate the great feasts of the Norse year, even while marking Easter or Christmas within her heart. These acts were not betrayals but survival, ways of weaving together identities without tearing the fabric of belonging. And what of those who turned fully? Some women embraced the gods of their new households. Over time, perhaps the Christian prayers grew faint, replaced by the stories and songs of their children's people. This, too, was a kind of resilience, not abandonment, but adaptation. To live, to endure, sometimes meant taking on the ways of others. We cannot judge them, for we do not know the depths of what they felt. In the sagas and histories, we glimpse faint echoes of these women. A wife who convinces her husband to accept baptism. A queen who builds a church in a land still marked by sacred groves. A mother who raises her son to become both a Christian ruler and a man still steeped in Norse tradition. These stories remind us that change often flows through the quietest channels, not the loudest battles. And in the smaller, unrecorded lives, the stories are perhaps even richer. Imagine a woman teaching her child a prayer she learned at her mother's side. The child grows up hearing both that prayer and the thunderous tales of Thor. In that child, the two worlds coexist, carried forward into a new generation. It is through such small, intimate acts that cultures shift, not only by decree, but by the quiet persistence of mothers, wives, daughters. Faith, in this sense, was not only religion. It was memory, identity, the bridge between what was lost and what could be made anew. For the noble women caught between Christianity and pagan life, every whispered prayer, every quiet ritual, every act of endurance was a way of saying, I am still here. My story continues. And so, their burden becomes our reflection. What does it mean to live between worlds? To hold to one tradition while honoring, or at least surviving, another? For some of us, the answer lies in family histories, in ancestors who carried faiths across borders. For others, it lies in personal journeys, moments where we ourselves stood between past and future, torn but still whole. To remember these women is to honor their resilience. Though history left their voices faint, though their choices were constrained, their quiet strength shaped generations. They remind us that change is not always a clash, it can also be a whisper, a candle lit in the dark, a prayer said softly where no one else can hear. When we step back from the stories of raids and halls, from the shadows of firelight and the whispers of forgotten prayers, what remains with us is something larger than history itself. It is the sense that these women, though silenced, though absent from chronicles, still leave echoes that reach us across centuries. Their voices were never recorded, yet their lives shaped the world that followed. And if we allow ourselves to imagine, gently and with care, we can begin to hear them. The fate of noble women after Viking conquests was never simply a private matter. Their bodies, their marriages, their silence, these were threads in the loom of politics, lineage, and survival. Yet within those threads, there was also quiet resilience. A resilience not written in sagas or carved in stone, but carried in lullabies, in memories passed to children, in customs kept alive against the odds. When we think about displacement today, about the millions who find themselves far from home because of war, conquest, or necessity, we begin to glimpse how familiar this story still is. The women who crossed seas unwillingly 1,000 years ago share something with those who cross borders now. The details differ, the centuries divide them, yet the human heart knows the same ache of loss, the same yearning for belonging. And so, when we remember these noble women, we are not only learning about the past, we are practicing empathy for the present. To imagine their nights of whispered prayer, their mornings in unfamiliar halls, is to train ourselves to listen for voices still too often silenced. If their voices could reach us now, what do you think they would want to say? Share your reflection. Perhaps they would tell us of sorrow, the grief of losing children, families, lands. Perhaps they would tell us of endurance, that they survived what they could not control, carrying fragments of their old selves into new lives. Or perhaps they would tell us of quiet victories, the way their teachings shaped sons who became leaders, or how their daughters remembered stories of the homeland long after the halls had changed. In imagining what they might say, we also remind ourselves of a truth. Silence in history does not mean absence of life. It means only that the record keepers looked elsewhere. The sagas exalted warriors and kings, yet those kings were born of mothers, raised in households shaped by women who endured and taught. To restore those voices is not to invent, but to remember with compassion. Let us pause here, in the quiet. Imagine sitting once more by the fire, the night deep around us. You hold a cup in your hands, the warmth seeping into your palms. And as the flames flicker, you think of those who once sat in halls not so different, carrying burdens of their own. The link between then and now feels thinner than you might expect. For resilience is not only a historical trait, it is a timeless one. The women we reflect upon tonight remind us that resilience is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is simply surviving another day, raising children with care, holding on to a song or a prayer even when no one else listens. Sometimes it is finding ways to belong in two worlds at once, without losing oneself entirely. We can learn from them. Not because their lives were glamorous, they were not. Not because their fates were enviable, they were not. But because in their quiet endurance, they show us the strength hidden in silence, the power of adaptation, the dignity of survival even when choice is taken away. Their echoes reach us in ways both subtle and profound. A saga mentions a queen who influenced her husband's baptism. Behind that single line lies a life of negotiation, persuasion, compromise. A chronicle notes a noblewoman taken in a raid. Behind that fact lies a world of grief, of adaptation, of memory. Each fragment is a doorway, inviting us to step closer, to listen more carefully. And as we do, we bring these women back into history, where they belong. For too long, history has been written with one ear closed, hearing only the clang of swords, the speeches of kings. But there were always softer voices, not less important, just less recorded. When we choose to imagine them, we choose to restore balance. We choose to honor the fullness of the human story. Do you see how this changes the way we think of the past? It is no longer only about battles and treaties. It becomes about people, real, vulnerable, enduring people. And when we see the past this way, we also see ourselves differently. We recognize that we, too, are part of stories not yet written, stories where resilience may be the quietest yet strongest thread. So let us close this reflection with gentleness. Imagine a woman, her name forgotten, sitting at the edge of a strange hall. The sounds around her are foreign. The food tastes different from what she once knew. But she hums a melody from her childhood, one that only she remembers. In that moment, she carries her homeland within her. She may never return, but she ensures that a part of it still lives. That is resilience. That is survival. That is humanity. And now, as listeners centuries later, we become part of her echo. By imagining her life, by honoring her endurance, we make sure she is not forgotten. Her silence becomes a lesson, her burden becomes a reflection, her resilience becomes an inspiration. History remembers warriors, but not always the quiet voices. Tonight, we have listened for those voices, and perhaps, in the calm of this moment, we can hear them more clearly than ever before. The candle burns low now, its flame softened to a small glow, a single bead of light holding back the darkness. Around us, the night has settled deeply, quiet and still. The sounds of the world grow faint, the distant sea no longer roaring, only sighing, the hall no longer filled with voices but hushed in its own slumber. We have walked far together through stories half remembered, voices half heard. And now, it is time to rest. Let us linger here, in this gentle darkness, and think of those women whose fates we have followed. They were not the ones crowned in chronicles, nor the ones sung of in saga. Yet they lived, they loved, they endured. And in their endurance, they carried history forward in ways too often unseen. Tonight, we have tried to listen for them, to give shape to the silence that surrounds them. When you close your eyes, perhaps you can picture one of them. A woman seated in a shadowed corner of a hall, her hands folded quietly in her lap. Or perhaps she stands by the shore, watching the tide, her thoughts adrift across waters she cannot cross again. Or perhaps she hums softly to a child, weaving memory into song. However you imagine her, hold that image gently, like a candle cupped against the wind. For in remembering, we honor. The night is always kindest to memory. In the dark, the noise of the day falls away, and what remains are whispers, soft, persistent, fragile, but enduring. These women were whispers in their own time, too easily drowned out by the clash of steel and the proclamations of kings. Yet still, they shaped the lives around them. Their children carried their songs. Their households bore their marks. Their faith and customs lingered, carried forward by unseen threads. And so, though history did not write their names, we know they were there. And in a way, they are still here. Each time we reflect, each time we wonder, each time we imagine their lives with empathy, they come alive again, not as ghosts, but as companions of thought, reminding us that silence does not mean absence, that survival itself can be a form of quiet triumph. I ask you now to rest with these memories. Let them become gentle, not heavy. Let them drift like the smoke of an extinguished candle, curling upward, then fading softly into the night air. For history, at its heart, is not only about facts. It is about people. People who felt, who feared, who hoped. And though their voices were muted, they are still part of us. As you settle into sleep, think of the blessings they might have wished upon those who came after. Perhaps they would hope for peace, for the safety of children, for the chance to grow old in a home not threatened by fire. Perhaps they would wish for memory, to not be forgotten, even if only in a quiet telling centuries later. Tonight, we grant them that wish. We remember. We speak of them with care. The hall grows darker now. Only embers glow faintly in the hearth, the last sparks holding warmth until morning. The candle has melted low, its flame flickering, almost at rest. And so, too, must we rest. If this journey touched you, I invite you to subscribe and return for more quiet histories. And tonight, rest well. May the voices of the past watch gently over your dreams. Good night.